Time is money. Don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. These and other cliches, while true, they all point to something in common, which is the 80-20 rule. And my guest today coaches his clients on bringing 80-20 into their practices, and he's going to share some ideas for us, with us, in this episode. I'm Carl White, principal at Mark Advisory Group, which is a healthcare marketing agency, and I'm also the host of Practice Care. The mission for both is the same, and that's to help private practice owners stay private. Not only is that what they really want, but care is better when the provider owns the practice, because that's when they're going to have the most clinical freedom they think is necessary to make the decisions that is best for their patient. Unlike when somebody else owns them, whoever that may be, usually, eventually, the owner's agenda starts to creep into the provider's ears, and then patient care is always fine, but it's never always quite what they want. And today, my guest is Bill Flynn. Bill is principal at Catalyst Growth Advisors, where he coaches leaders to get to the next level, and he coaches business owners on making growth more predictable. As a coach, in addition to being connected with MG100, Women's Business Collaborative, MassMEP, Small Giants, and EforAll, Bill has earned certifications from ScalingUp, Gravitas Impact, Metronome United, Predictive Index, Stakeholder Centered Coaching, and the Neuroleadership Institute. He's worked for and advised hundreds of companies, including startups, where he has a long track record of success spanning multiple industries. Bill is the author of the bestseller, Further, Faster, The Vital Few Steps That Take the Guesswork Out of Growth. Away from work, he's an avid reader, amateur musician, athlete, and enjoys volunteering locally. And when he's not cheering on his collegiate-champion, musically gifted daughter, he lives and works in Greater Boston. Bill, thanks for coming on Practice Care.
Great. Thanks for having me, Carl.
Yeah. And so I've been looking forward to this one because we all say 80-20 probably all the time. And we say it so much that we've forgotten what it means or what its power can be. So this is going to be a nice reminder and a lot of good tips. Before we get into that, though, I want to start where I start with every guest. Just help us get to know you a bit better than your bio will let us do. And I'm curious how you got into coaching. I mean, your resume and your bio says you could have gone in a lot of different directions, clearly. So why this one?
Yeah, so I've had two sort of arcs in my career. I did startups for a really long time, about 25 years. I did 10 startups here in the Boston area over that time, all in high tech.
Okay.
Generally on the sort of front office part of the business, COO, sales, marketing, service, that kind of stuff. And about 8 years ago, I switched to doing coaching.
Okay.
And coaching is such an amorphous word. It means
exactly the word that I use to describe it.
Yeah. It reminds me of, it's strategy, right? Everyone uses strategy in a certain way or
culture.
Whatever. Yeah. So for me, how I apply my background and learning in coaching is, I think it's more appropriate to say I'm a teacher more than a coach. Mm-hmm. I take a growth framework that leverages really all the great management thinkers of the last 100 years, Drucker, Deming, Shine, McGregor, Bennis, Porter, these are all people who have been talking about the same thing for many years. If you go read Edgar Schein's book, it has psychological safety all over it, but
yeah,
that word's only been around for the last 20 years because of Amy Edmondson. So a lot of these principles are things that I've come to appreciate. And so I take a framework called ScalingUp, which some of your folks may know, which is just another distillation of what I just said, but putting it more into exercises and practice that you can apply. And at the other end, you come out with this sort of one-page plan.
Okay.
I use probably that for 60% of what I do. And then I have other things that I put on top of it or add to it. I'm a bit of a neuroscience geek, so I throw that in as well as some other things that I think it's missing. Mm-hmm. And I teach that over really about 1.5 to 2 years, give or take. Some of my clients take a little bit longer, some take a little bit less time. And they build this sort of framework out.
Okay.
So I bring in the framework and they're really filling it in. So I'm not, as I like to say, I'm Socrates with a tool bag. I ask a bunch of questions, and then from those questions, we apply some of the tools that are available.
Okay.
So that's sort of what I do. Why, how did I get into it? About, now what is 2007? So yeah, about 15 years ago. I stopped. I think I was on startup 5 or so, and my daughter and wife at the time said, "Hey, do you need to do this again?" And
It's pretty
I did
grueling,
pretty
I
well. I
guess,
was 5
right?
or 6 at that point, and had done, not anywhere I can retire, but done pretty well. And I said, "No, yeah, I can take some time off." So I did that for a little while, and then during that time, I was asked to do some consulting and some other things. So, what I was asked to do was help this guy sell his company, and I did that. He sold it, and I took over the division at that time. So I decided to go back to work, and I took over the division of about $100 million company that bought us. And I took over that division. And on the first day of me being the general manager, I like to say it was the best and the worst day of my professional life.
Okay.
The entire technical infrastructure collapsed on itself, and we were an email hosting company before Gmail and Office 365. This was a precursor to Office 365. And we had to fix it. So luckily the larger company knew that the infrastructure needed to be overhauled, but it had to accelerate that.
Okay.
We lost like 1,000 customers in about a week. I went
Jesus.
around the country with the president of the larger company, and we had to sort of save some of these big partners. We had some billion-dollar partners that were with us. So I went to my team and said, "Hey, I've never run tech support before. I've never, I'm technically adept, but I don't know anything about network infrastructures." This was before AWS and that kind of stuff. We had to have our own data center that we rented out, or part of it that we rented out. I said, "But I can tell you what I'd like it to look like when we're out of this, and let's discuss, debate, and decide that." That's sort of a vision kind of thing. And then I need each of you to take your individual departments and draw the roadmap from where you are now to there, right? So apply what we did to your department. We did that, and it worked. And at the time, I wasn't smart
You
enough
almost
to know
look
there
a little
were.
surprised.
Yeah,
As you
yeah.
say
It
that.
was,
Oh my
who
God, it
knew?
worked.
And I wasn't smart enough to know there were already some of these business operating systems out there. And I equate it to EOS. A lot of people know EOS.
Yeah.
So it's sort of a mini EOS. And we turned the company around relatively quickly. I didn't lose any of the 60 people that were working there. I left about a year and a half after that. We were on our way to doubling from when we started. So it really worked out great. But the best part was 2 of the 5 of us who had been relatively new to management, certainly not in this horrible situation, told me basically the same thing when I left, which was, "I just want you to know that what you made me do, that roadmap you made me do, hated it really, really hard. But I'm so glad you made me do it, because it really helped me to think differently, and now I can do this." So I sort of tucked that away and said, "I want to do that again at some point." And then 4 relatively bad startups later, I decided to become a coach, and I get to do that now every day, or almost every day.
Okay.
So
Excellent.
that's my long short story to how I got
Got
there.
it. Got it. And since we're talking about 80/20, in the road mapping experience, the turning it around, did 80/20 come into play? We're going to get into more of it, but I'm curious.
Yeah, I didn't really have as much of an appreciation for it, at least specifically. I've always been one who tries to do things simply, and I'm a first principle thinker. I try to be a first principle thinker. I've applied that to lots of other things I've done. So I'm sure I did that here as well, right? Because we're not going to do everything. We're going to do the things that get you from here to there. So I would say by mistake or accident is, yes,
Yeah.
the 80/20 principle was sort of woven throughout.
Sure. And it's if you look back on almost anything you do, it's like batting 1,000 on how often it applies. I mean, it just does. So let's get into it. Just to make sure that we and our listeners are talking about the same thing. Give us your definition of 80/20. And I want to ask the first question after that is, when you think about like a private practice owner, a doctor, a dentist, any kind of provider that owns their own practice, what are the characteristics that person needs to have to be successful implementing doing 80/20?
Sure. So 80/20 is also known as the Pareto principle,
right?
And it's also known as the law of the vital few.
I didn't know I had that second name.
Actually, I have my little book here. So my book that I wrote is further, faster, the vital few steps that take the guesswork out of growth. So I sort of applied that to
I knew the title said it's got to be related, but I was going to let you say it.
So what the 80-20 rule is basically that 80% of the results are from 20% of the effort.
Mm-hmm.
And so Pareto, I think it was wealth of landowners or something. It was his data set.
Okay.
And he found out that 20% of the landowners in, Italy or wherever he was doing this, really had 80% of the wealth.
Got it.
And then what's interesting is if you apply it to your own life, I like to say, look in your closet. My guess is 80% of the time you wear 20% of the clothes that are in your closet.
Yeah.
Right. If you look at the 100 friends that you have, you probably spend a lot more time with like 20 of them than you do with the other 80. It applies in almost every aspect of our life. Because that's also the way our brain works. Again, I am a bit of a neuroscience geek, and our brain likes simple. Our brain likes few things. It doesn't like, in America, we like choice, but actually our brain hates choice.
It hates it. Yes.
Hates it. Yeah. And it can paralyze, sort of moving forward because there's so many things to do. And so the 80-20 is sort of that model that says, I like to say, so one of the things I would say to your practice owners is, if you thought about a day or a week or a month and all the decisions that you made, like if you wrote them all down and then said which one of these decisions really had an impact on the business, it's just going to be like a few. And as I say to other leaders, your job is to try to make fewer and fewer decisions, but make those ones that are really, really important as the primary thing that you do. I think Peter, and this is something Peter Drucker has always said, right? He said, that most of the decisions you make as a leader, you don't need to make. You should be teaching other people how to do that. Right? And you should be saving your gray matter and white matter, if you will, in your brain for just a few things that really truly matter, because only a few things truly matter, but they matter tremendously.
Yeah.
You want to save your energy and your brain space for that. So that's to me, that's the 80-20 rule, at least the way I see it.
So characteristics of somebody who's going to succeed implementing it. I mean, I could think of, well, it's not 100%, it's 80. So what do I do about the other 20% of results? Don't those matter? Like you could just feel people start to spin,
Yeah, of course.
I treat patients. I whether they come in needing a Band-Aid or they need a major, I have to, how do you help them kind of be more successful at doing it? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah. So, it's not something that we, especially in the West, I think, really get our head around, because we often confuse activity with productivity. We think because we're doing stuff, that's good. And, being bored, especially now with these things we have, right? Nobody's bored anymore. Nobody has just time doing nothing.
True. Using only 20% of the apps on their phone, right? Not the other 80%.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it sort of goes against conventional wisdom. So that's hard. But I think, if you have the time, this is one thing that I ask all my clients to do, and I don't know if they do it or not, but I certainly encourage them to, is take a list of your customers. And it may be different for practice folks, but in general, I'll give it, I'll share with what I do and see if it applies. I'll let you tell me. Is that, again, 80% of your profitable customers, profit is really coming from about 20% of your customers, right? Those ones that come back on a regular basis, they don't complain. They're referring other people to you, etc. So if you take a list of those customers and then put them in and put 3 columns next to it, is the first column is they love me. The next one is we love them, or I love them, and the next is profit. And I actually have a chiropractor that I work with, and we've talked about this, and he's found that either the kind of customers they have or the kind of approach they have a number of customers that come back on a regular basis, right? So his approach to care is ongoing care, right? He wants to treat athletes, and so once we sort of fix the initial problem, you should come back once a month or twice a month, and you sort of get a tune-up,
Yeah.
right? And
Yep.
those are the ones that he wants. Those are profitable, right? Or as
Hmm.
profitable as can be with, medical insurance and all that kind of stuff.
Understood, but
But over the
yes.
long term,
Yeah.
product is on two axes, but I like to say it's a percent and then it's also a volume, right? You'll give
Yep.
up a low percent to get a lot more volume.
Yep.
So really think about those, and either try to find more of those or try to turn the ones that you have more into those, right? So
Hmm.
he has some other doctors that work there, and they're not as productive. Their clients don't come back as often as his do, because
Hmm.
he has a different philosophy towards it.
Hmm.
It's about keeping them well as opposed to fixing their problems.
Yes.
And it's almost always a problem that gets them there, but the goal is to have it so they don't come back with, I can't walk or I can't get
Hmm.
up, whatever. So that would be sort of the mindset you need to have, is that it really is there. So take the data, look at it,
Hmm.
and you look at your own team, right? And you'll find that, and many of these practices have small teams, but so if there's 5 of them, there's probably 1 or 2 really, really strong people on your team
Hmm.
that keep the office going and that kind of stuff. And then you have the others. Your job is to either bring those 3 or 4 other people up to
Hmm.
closer to the other 2, or find other people.
Yeah.
Then it makes your office a heck of a lot easier to run, because you're not having to do all
Yeah.
this stuff.
Or if they're barely hanging on, maybe you don't need them at all. I mean, instead of 3, you
Yeah.
need 1, so yeah.
Yeah. So it's really a mindset that you
Hmm.
have to have, which is really, hey, uh, the few things, what are the few things in the business that really are driving the business or the team or whatever the thing is.
Yeah.
Um, but again, I think it's hard. It's a struggle. We're bombarded all the time on do more,
Yeah.
right? You have to
Yeah.
keep busy. If you're sitting around doing nothing,
Yeah.
that's bad, which
Yeah.
I don't think it is necessarily.
No, and some really good points in there. You're on the one hand, you're right. Much of healthcare is sort of the revenue is ceilinged out by what insurance will reimburse. There's plenty of private pay going up, but nevertheless, but that doesn't mean that you have to, I'll say, pursue all types of patients equally. I had a guest on a year ago, an optometrist, and they went through a similar exercise. Who do we want? Who do we not want, but who are we going to spend more of our time trying to get more of, and
Yeah.
why? And then look, if somebody else who doesn't fit that description walks in the door, they get fine clinical care. We're just not trying to find more of them. And they had their own definition of it. And even if I forget if there was a revenue or a treatment component or not, let's just say that there wasn't, they're happier throughout the day. The patients are more compliant. I mean, a lot of things go better when you clearly define, we want patients that look like this. And then you actually are successful at getting more of them. So
Yeah.
totally makes sense. And we didn't
Agreed.
even it was just all about get more of the patients you want. And that's how they defined it. And so, and not surprisingly, their revenue was better, their expense, everything was better because they did a good job of defining. I forget if referrals was a part of it, but yeah, you've got sort of 4 quadrants, A, B, C, and D, and there was not based on your 4 dimensions, but we like them, they like us, they refer. Yeah, and if you then they had to figure out how do we go get more of them. Takes a little while, but it happens. It can definitely happen. And they could have picked 5 other things to do in addition, but they didn't, because they're like, well, if we get this good, lots of other good things happen because this is good.
Agreed. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a great example. It's Shoulders Hospital up in Canada did the same thing, and they were treating everybody, and then they decided to focus just on hernias.
Mm.
And they are basically the go-to hospital in Canada for hernias, and they have a particular way they do it. It's they only take certain types of people. If you're overweight or whatever, they reject you and say, you got to go do these things to get back. And
Yep.
they have an entire process that they go through, that the patients that are recovering are actually onboarding the patients that are coming in as part of the process. And they've done this wonderful thing, and their revenues have grown, their profits have grown, because they focus on one thing as opposed to lots of stuff.
Yeah.
That's a bit of an extreme example, but
but it makes the point. I mean, it makes the point. And for this podcast guest last year, I never thought to ask him, so the patients that you wanted more of currently, are they about 20% of your total patient volume, or rather 80, and are they about 80%? We didn't look at that, but I bet you it's not too far.
Yeah. And it might, again, it's hard. It might be 70-30.
Yeah.
It's rarely 50-50, right? Most of your profit usually comes from a smaller set of folks. or a
Yeah.
small set of things that you do.
Yeah. A majority of your desired outcome is usually driven by a minority of those who could drive it, or the
Right.
things
And
that,
that's
that
the
can
hard
help.
part. You have to sort of be of a sort of investigative mind, right? Sort of
Hmm.
a mind that's curious and like, is that, do we have that here? Try to find it. And then
Hmm.
you have to like find out, okay, what is the common, what are some commonalities among these things?
Yeah.
And can we make more of them,
Yeah.
or get more of them, or whatever it is?
Yeah.
So it's sort of that curious mindset as well. And I say you have to think like an FBI agent, or
Hmm.
whatever. You want to really think about trying to get to the essence
Yeah.
of what's going on, right? And
Yeah.
be investigative.
Yeah. And it's easy, like, even say, we're going to presuppose that 80/20 is alive and well somewhere in our practice, probably in many places. It's probably alive and well on the revenue side. It's alive and well maybe on the expense in certain really key areas. Let's just go find it. So then we can start optimizing it, or at least
Yep.
leave it alone, or whatever. Um, when you find people resistant to it, I don't want to do this, or maybe not so much. I don't know. It's not, 80/20 doesn't exist for me, or fine, it does, but I can't find it. Like, what kinds of points of resistance do you see? And the reason I ask is I want listeners to hear it, because if it sounds like you, Bill and I are gently trying to convince you to kind of get over it and go look for it, because it could be pretty powerful if you actually find
Yeah,
it.
yeah. Yeah, I think so. The major resistance is I don't have time, right?
Mm,
And that is often true. When I start working with clients, they're very, very busy. They're doing lots of stuff. Um, and uh, so the first thing I say, especially to the leader, and a practice might be different, but in most companies have a leader.
yeah, these do
Uh,
too. They're
yeah,
just
is your
doctors
job is to
who,
fire
hang a
yourself.
shingle.
Your job is to fire yourself from the day to day of the practice as much as possible. Um,
Mm,
most practices are run by the technician, right?
hmm.
And so he or she is not only the leader of the business, but they're also the main technician,
Yeah.
whatever it might be. So that's harder. Um, and what I would say is, you're probably the main technician, but there might be things that, of all the procedures that you do, or all of the things that you do with your clients, maybe you're going to do the ones that are at a certain level,
Hmm.
and teach everyone else how to do the other stuff.
Hmm.
Um, so time is almost always the factor. And I say correct. So the first thing to do is not try to figure out how to jam more stuff into your day. It's
Yeah.
first, what are the things that you can get rid of
Hmm.
during the day? Do fewer things so you can have more time to do this.
Hmm.
Um, the other is it's probably a bit of overwhelm. It's like, well, I don't even know where to start.
Yeah.
What do I do? And uh, my advice is typically just start with something small, right? You
Yeah.
don't have to like completely transform the whole practice.
Hmm.
Just start with something small that you're doing. Be it maybe it's one thing that you're doing in the business. So if it's a practice person, sort of as I said before, is if you look at your day, which of the patients of that day could someone else have worked with?
Hmm.
And just try to take that off your plate. Now, not saying fewer patients overall, because I know that's generally how they make money. So keep that up, but have maybe there's another provider in your practice, maybe an NP if you're in healthcare, or something else,
Hmm.
just try to have those few things that you could have them to someone else, or
Yeah.
part of the process, right? You can sort of segment how you do things.
Yeah.
Um,
Or
so
just kind of keep your mind open. Let's say you don't have an NP or a PA, just to write down somewhere, if we got one, then I could remove these things. I mean, you don't have to have everything sort of in-house already to sort of shift things around to realize 80/20. I imagine part of it is probably, for a lot of your clients, is we're not ready to do it today, but now we've got our own roadmap. Today we're at, the proportions are out of whack, but if we added this and changed that, then we could realize 80/20 in that part of our business, right?
exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
Like recently, I went to get a physical, and the doctor could have taken me through the whole thing, and there was a time that he did.
Hmm.
He now had I think it was an NP and some other nurse, and they did I spent most of my time with them.
Yeah.
They then consulted with him, and he's known me for a while. And then he came in, and asked me a few questions, but he was able to do other things.
Yeah.
Example.
Yeah.
So that saved him probably 25 to 40 minutes of his time that it could be, that he was doing something else.
Yeah. And it's an interesting, just to kind of pull that thread on that specific point. This is not so new anymore. Having physician's assistants or nurse practitioners or doctors and nurse practitioners come in for many practices, whatever the stat is, that's being done out of necessity because our expenses go up a bit every year, but reimbursement at best stays flat. And so there's the squeeze. So you out of necessity, you're finding, how do I rearrange things to stay in practice? But that's not the mode in my mind to let's go find 80-20. Let's really optimize this thing. This is different. You're sort of doing incremental out of necessity. Why wait for these things? Like, the optometrist guest last year, he didn't wait for anything. He just this is crazy. You noticed it a bit more of an entrepreneurial, I'll say, thread than some others, but he didn't want to wait for, why can't we have a happier day? Why can't we have a more productive day? Why can't we have a more profitable day? Why not? And the connection he made was, well, it's based on the type of patients we have in large part. So let's have a look at that. And that one who just left was a waste of our time. You know what I mean? So they just started to the bug sort of planted itself, and they started looking.
Yeah, there's a question that's been around for a long time, which is called the one thing question, which is, what's one thing that we could do that would make everything else easier or unnecessary?
It's a great book.
Just ask that question, right? And I'm a big fan. Just then write down a whole bunch of, don't try to figure out the one thing. Just write down anything that could fit as a possibility, and then look through that and say, which of these things can I do now?
Yeah.
And just, it doesn't matter how much impact, and typically change is not something that comes in one fell swoop. It's usually these small incremental steps as you go along the way. So, asking that question of you and maybe some of your trusted staff, because they're going to know some things as well. So, I was always wondering, why do we do this? It takes so long and whatever. And then they might come up with some ideas as well.
Yeah. Or take a process that seems like, man, this has a lot of steps. Do we really have to do? I was in a prior part of my career, I worked for a company, and we were at this conference, internal conference, and the speaker used to work for like a Formula One racing team. And the guy was fascinating. And there was this one story where they were watching in slow-mo the whole pit stop. And at the first pit stop, some guy races out and removes this piece of metal from the back, like the fin that goes over the top, like the back bumper. And they freeze it. And the guy goes, why is he doing that? He's got to remove it. Why is he removing it? Because it doesn't serve any purpose. Well, why is it there in the first place? Nobody knew. Why don't we just not put it on in the first place?
Right, exactly.
What motivated them, this is great, is they started the season and their pit stop took 9 seconds. In the first competitive race of the season, whoever won got it down to 6 seconds, 3 seconds. And this guy said to himself, well, we're screwed. We're best we can do is second place. How do we find 3 seconds? Oh my God. Yeah. And that's what motivated all right, break it down step by step, microsecond by microsecond, what's going on. But it was that step doesn't need to be there. Just get rid of it. And processes grow, and nobody stops to say, whoa, why, this used to take 3 minutes. Now it takes 12. What happened? There's another area, maybe. Just, you're right. Pick somewhere. Just pick something.
Yeah. But it's the question that you ask, right? To me, it's not, how can we, so let's go back to your racing thing. How can we remove these 4 bolts faster? It's like, well, how can we change the tire in a faster way? And now I think most racing cars don't have the 4 bolts anymore. They have 1.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
And they remove that one, and that's it. Yeah. Right. So it isn't like, how do we get a faster thing, faster tool to do it, or whatever. It's, you have to ask the larger question is, how can we have a happier workplace? How can we find have fewer of these customers that we don't like and more of the customers that we do like? How could we do it? What would be the thing that we could do?
Yeah. Or maybe in a practice, go to your billing group or to your front office staff and say, what is the most annoying thing that we have to do over and over again every day? and then just kind of map it out. Why is it so annoying, or why does it seem to take so long? And, make it happen in half the time. And just maybe there's something there too. Like just try to
Yeah.
think of like, where are places to start? Look around the office. What's going on in that corner? What are those 6 people doing?
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. So this chiropractor I was telling you about, when I first started working with them, the first question I asked is, okay, what do you want from this practice?
Mm.
And he came up with I'd like it to be this size, and like, so he was in his 60s now. And so he's like, I want to be able to sell it for this much. Like, that would be great.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, okay, well, how would you make that happen? And I said, what was the one thing? And when we really talked about it, it was he needed to find another doctor.
Mm-hmm.
That was the biggest way to increase the practice. But he needed to find the right doctor because he had a
Mm-hmm.
particular way of doing things. And then I said, okay, great. So how do you do that? And he brought to me his his job description, and sort of how he advertises for it. And we read through, and I said, well, how's that going? He said, oh, yeah, we don't really get a lot of candidates, and I talked to a couple, and they're just not the right fit. I said, okay. I said, so what do you, what are you looking for? What is what is sort of, if you had the ideal candidate,
Mm-hmm.
how would you want them to be? And then what are you providing to them? And then we sort of redid we took like a half an hour, 45 minutes, and rewrote the ad.
Mm-hmm.
That was more about his core values and the philosophy of the practice, and why it would be so great for you to work here. And, and I said, well, how much money do you want these guys to make? And so we came up with the amount of money. I said, well, put that in. And is it reasonable? He said, yeah, you have to work hard, but you have to see, forget what the number of patients a day was, but it's like 20 or 30 a day.
Mm-hmm.
These are chiropractors, you're in and out in 5 minutes, right?
Yeah.
So 30 days is not too bad, but you got to write the notes and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So he rewrote it and put it back out. And he had, within a week, he had 4 candidates call him up and say, I'm interested. And he hired one like within a few months. And it was all because it took a second, right? And really thought about, what do I want here, right? And I just don't think, because we're so busy, this is the hard thing. We don't have time to do that.
Yeah.
Right. And you go home and you're exhausted. So you don't want to do that either. It's like,
yeah. It's true. It's true. So I want to hold that thought about not having time for a second. I say to a lot of my guests, we could go on for a long time, and because there's so much to dig into, but in the interest of sort of a more bite-sized podcast, 2 questions I ask every guest to kind of bring it home. The first one is, anything you think I should have asked you in the context of what we're talking about, but I just didn't ask you?
So I guess what I would probably say is, so what have I learned, right? And so I've done 10 different businesses. I've probably worked at 15 or so total. I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of leaders and spoken to lots of them. And sort of what have I found is sort of that thing that matters the most. And it's that most businesses fail or struggle. Very few thrive. And the ones that thrive are that example that you had of your optometrist, is they just take a little bit of time and they ask sort of, very fundamental questions. Why are we here? If we could lay out the perfect day, or the perfect week, what would that look like? And then sort of try to strive towards it. You might never get there. But ask yourself, what are the few things that truly matter to us? Also understand that there is a huge gap between what science knows and what business does. There is a lot of aspects to business from a scientific perspective. I spoke to a group of structural engineering companies a few weeks ago, and none of them has really been, they're very similar to practice. I think, they're the technician, they're smaller businesses, some are larger, but they don't think about the business as the product. They think about the work product as the product.
Yeah.
Right? You think about, when you're a leader, the product is really your business. How do you make this the best possible thing for the 2 main constituencies that you're working with, which is your clients or your customers and your team, right? The people that work here. How can you make this a great world for them? So I think that's what I would say, is what I would emphasize. We sort of touched on a little bit, but really emphasize is that your the businesses that do really well do just a few things really, really well.
Mhm.
You don't have to do lots of stuff well. You just have to find the few things that really make the biggest difference and really double down on those.
Yeah.
So that's sort of what I would emphasize or say.
Okay. Okay, good. And then the other question that I ask is, all right, we've caught somebody's attention and they want to get started on this. Maybe they've been thinking about it, maybe not. Sometimes people get stuck at the starting line. So what are one or two simple, practical things that you'd recommend that they do to get started? I want to throw in one, which is carve out some time to think about it.
Yeah.
Like some real, not at the end of the day when you're exhausted. I mean, if you're, this has got to be worth some priority time because it's been weighing on you, right? And if it's caught your attention, then give it the time it deserves. That's what I'm going to throw in the ring.
Yeah, so I have two. One's a little big, and then one's a much smaller, bite-sized thing. So what I always recommend to folks is you probably have a vision for your practice.
Mm-hmm.
Write it down.
Mm.
Take a Saturday or whatever the day, take a few hours and just write down, but write it from this perspective is just imagine you're out 3, 4, 5 years and you're looking back. It's like, okay, this went as wildly successfully as it possibly could have imagined. What happened and what does it look like? So write it as if it's already done. This is how the practice works. And the clients come in, they do this, they do that. They're super happy, they leave, and they're whatever. Those things are. The team does this, and then write all that down, and then share it with your team and say, here's sort of what I would like to see as the practice. And the first thing they're going to do is make sure that it's clear to them.
Mm-hmm.
So they might say, what do you mean by this? What do you mean by that? So you want to make it really super clear. Once you do that and you give that to them, you'd be amazed at how much they start helping you. Now that leaders, the followers want to know where they're going.
Mm-hmm.
But we as leaders don't often tell them because we just assume they know.
Yeah.
But they don't.
Yeah.
Right? And every single one of my, I've done this probably 20 times, give or take. And every single one of my leaders, I have them write this thing down. And the team is so appreciative of it. They're like, wow, this is one. It either does one or two or both things. When it energizes the team, like, wow, that would be really cool when you do that. And it says, okay, like, wow, I didn't know that,
Mm-hmm.
right? But that makes perfect sense. And it gives them the freedom to use their own brains to help you get there, as opposed to you having to do everything. And
right.
They say that what happens is as a business grows, it gets heavier and heavier because you're pulling the business yourself. And as it grows, it gets heavier and it's harder. And so if you do the vision, and then I'd say, then just pick one thing out of all that and just start it. Make it really simple, really easy. Just pick one thing as part of the vision and go from there.
Okay. That's good. That's plenty to get carve out some time to do it. So yes, absolutely. Excellent. Bill, thank you so much for coming on and shedding some light on this, because it's an easy concept to say, but you can certainly let yourself get stymied and stuck if you picture the entire practice at once rather than, picking one or two areas and getting some success. Thank you again for coming on. All the contact information that you provided, we're going to put in the show notes for your episode. So anybody listening, you want to get a hold of Bill Flynn, that's where you go to do so. A couple of points before we wrap up. First, if you're like Bill or I that serves private practice owners, or if you're a private practice owner yourself and you've got some experience on the business side that you think others would benefit from, whatever it might be, we are not choosy here. It's all valuable. We want you to come on Practice Care and tell the world about it. In Bill's show notes, and in every show notes episode, there is a link, a couple of questions. Tell us what's on your mind so that we can get you scheduled as soon as possible. And finally, if you haven't done it yet, you got to subscribe to Practice Care. We're easy to find. We're on Apple, Spotify, all the major platforms. We have a new episode every week. Subscribe to make sure that you can get them and stay up to date. Thanks very much. And until next time.